This is the CFF Sites Week 11 College Fantasy Football Show. I am your host, Joe DeSalvo, and Week 11, don't need to add any superlatives to that one. Um, we're basically at the point in the college fantasy football season where the pretenders are long gone, and everybody else is either jockeying for seeding or they're a contender right now. And you know what? You've had to navigate two, or you're having to navigate two really tough weeks between weeks 10 and week 11, a combined 60 plus teams on a bye. I think there were 32 last week. I think there's another 33 this week. These bye weeks are really testing the depth of your college fantasy football roster. Um, and it's really just allowing you to jockey for position now for most of you guys. For those that have done extremely well, these weeks can be tough to navigate to hold on to those top seeds. And for you guys that have been right on the fringe of the playoffs, competing with other teams in your league, most likely the team with the better depth is going to come out on top over the course of weeks 10 and 11. A lot to navigate. We're going to get into that. We're going to look back at week 10. But before we do that, I want to get into the 4-1 Super Fantasy League. There's a lot going on. And boy, these standings are super tight. Changed the format up this year. And look, for one, it's been very pleasant for me because there's been no headaches from people forgetting to that have made roster errors. So very enjoyable for me to just kind of sit back, watch the scoring unfold, watch teams jockey for position at the top of the standings, and watching you guys battle it out week to week through all the different formats. You've got the head-to-head, the two halves tournament, the eliminator. You got the total points league. Let me just give everyone an update with what's going on with the 4-1 Super Fantasy League. If you don't play, guys, you've got to get in next year. 4 different formats. You build one weekly roster, and that roster competes in every format for as long as you stay alive in each respective format. So, in the 4-1 Super Fantasy League head-to-head tournament, we're now making it to we've made it to the points in week 11 and 12 where the semifinal matchup is going to be a cumulative 2-week total matchup. We've got the 16 seed BJ Urso going against the 5 seed Tri-Spoke. We've got the number 36 seed P. Fosjan taking on number 68 M. Benji 23 in the semifinal matchup. Winners will face off and guarantee themselves first and second place. Remember, this is a 2-week matchup, and then the winners will play in weeks 13 and 14, combined 2-week matchup to see who wins that format, who finishes first, who finishes second. In the two halves tournament, remember, I've been talking about this one for a while. CP McCon won the first half tournament. He's sitting in the championship waiting for the winner of the second half tournament. He did not advance in the second half tournament. We're down to 4. We got the number 8 seed B. Sitka 31 taking on the 5 seed Joe Haddix. And we have in the other semifinal matchup, number 14 Rand University is taking on number 26 Koff Bulls. Good luck to you guys. Semifinal matchups of the 2-half tournament. CP McCon awaits you in weeks 13 and 14 to see who's going to be the 2-halves tournament champion. In the eliminator, we still have a while to go. We still have 20 teams alive in that tournament. So I'm not going to go ahead and give all of you guys a shout out. But the one thing I want to bring attention to is the total points league, the total overall standings all year. We've got Rebel Nut topping the standings in first place. And he's only, get this, guys, he's only 1.4 points ahead of ND Base 2001. He's only 6 points ahead of Joe Haddix, who sits in the third spot. And he's only 8 points ahead of B. Sitka 31. There's a lot of you guys. Look, I'm looking down the list. We've had some guys post some 500-point weeks. If you're within a couple of hundred points of the leader, you still realistically have a shot to win this league. And from what I'm looking at right now, that's probably about 15, 16, almost 20 deep within a couple of hundred. It only takes one big week. But boy, we've got a battle brewing here with a couple of weeks left. We've got four guys within 8 points of one another at the top of the standing. So congrats to all of you guys. Just wanted to slow down to give you guys a shout out on the 4-1 Super Fantasy League. I've really enjoyed watching the league unfold this year, and the feedback that I continue to get every year in the 4-1 Super Fantasy League format is just fantastic. If you don't play, you've got to play in it next year. You've got a chance at first or second in any format wins you money. It was $10. We upped the ante this year. Changed a little bit of the rules, but it's turned out for the better, and everybody seems to be enjoying it. Great feedback. I appreciate the feedback that you guys are sending in. Keep it coming. But I'm really enjoying watching that league unfold. To me, it's just the best college fantasy football league out there. And of course, I'm a little biased. It creates a little bit of work on my end, but when you've got four leagues going on at one time, and there's a lot of you guys that you're just so engaged all throughout the year because there's just so many different formats. So congrats to everyone still alive. Let's get into talking about the games. Let's look back at week 10, talk about what we're going to look forward to in week 11. And as I usually do, we're just going to go in order. Getting out the show maybe a little bit earlier than usual, but it's given me a chance to kind of assess the land, pick up on some injuries, or at least talk about them moving forward. I just want to start at the top. And James Madison, that was a situation in the beginning of the year where we didn't know if Alonzo Barnett was going to be ready, right? Matthew Sluka, they bring him in. Beginning of the year, it was kind of like that was like, okay, stay away. They're playing both guys. And, I remember saying, a few weeks ago that if they ever just decided on one quarterback, that quarterback would probably be a top 10, top 15 college fantasy football quarterback. Well, Alonzo Barnett has just absolutely turned it on. He's got four touchdowns, I think, 14 touchdowns in the last three games. Um, he's absolutely taking it to another level. And for you guys that look, this is one of those players that probably didn't get drafted, was a waiver wire pickup, maybe not until midway through the season when he started getting most of the snaps behind center. Like I said, Alonzo Barnett, Matthew Sluka, we had Sluka in the preseason rankings up there because there was just a lot of hesitation about whether or not Barnett was going to be healthy. Well, not only is he healthy, he's really turning it on. He's a rushing threat as well. And like I mentioned, 14 touchdowns in the last three games. He's absolutely a fantasy factor down the backstretch of the season. Now, when we talk about players trending one way, we've got to talk about players that are trending the other way too, right? Remember when UTSA running back Robert Henry was all the rage? I think he had scored two touchdowns in the first four games of the season. Well, he's only scored two touchdowns in the last four games in which he's played. UTSA challenging game going on the road at South Florida. And if there's a weak link in the South Florida defense, it's in the passing game. So I'm really curious to see how Robert Henry gets utilized. Can we see him return to his early season form and bounce back? That'll be an interesting watch. Now, another quarterback that has turned for the better down the stretch, really come out of nowhere for you guys. Samari Collier, the quarterback for Coastal Carolina. He has rushed for at least 70 yards in three straight games. He has scored 5 rushing touchdowns during that span and thrown 4 touchdowns. And I'm telling you guys, in 2 quarterback leagues, he's an absolute starter for a lot of you guys in a lot of formats. Samari Collier coming up, coming or becoming a fantasy factor, one of those waiver wire additions. Remember, we talked about it at the beginning of the year. College fantasy football leagues, your foundation is established in the draft, but leagues are won on the waiver wire, and it's guys like Samari Collier. If he can remain hot through this back end of the season, he's going to find himself in a lot of starting rosters in a lot of college fantasy football playoff teams. Now, Again, we'll go back to the other way again. Memphis running back situation. Remember, beginning of the year, we had Greg DeRozier, we had Sutton Smith, and it was like, who is it going to be? One or the other. The suggestion was to go ahead and take both of those guys in best ball formats, and it was working out pretty good for the beginning of the season. But now all of a sudden, we've got Frank Peasant, who's become a peasant, 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. And Frank Peasant, if he's going to be the goal line guy or someone that's going to get the ball around the goal line, I'm not sure how you lean on Greg DeRozier, and Sutton Smith hasn't been a factor for a number of weeks now. So Frank Peasant becoming a thorn in the side of anyone that has shares of any other Memphis running back. Now, we'll go over to Syracuse real quick, and I want to bring this up because that performance against North Carolina that Syracuse had, where they started Joseph Filardi at quarterback. Now, look, Syracuse was already kind of dead to us from a fantasy perspective, but at least Ricky Collins gives us a couple of decent options, maybe in the passing game, or at least a couple of options. 4 of 18 for 39 yards against North Carolina. I don't see how there's any way that that kid gets another start. Matter of fact, I remember saying in the beginning of the year that I thought Fran Brown was a little overrated. For me, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Brett Pry over at Virginia Tech when he took over. He had that good first year. I remember bringing this example up the beginning of the year, saying that that's who Fran Brown reminded me of, riding that wave from last year. And then he goes out and beats Clemson that next week. And I kind of had to retract that. But who's not beating Clemson this year, right? And so now I look at it, and I'm still where I was in the beginning of the year. I'm not convinced that Fran Brown is all of that. I mentioned in the beginning of the year I thought Syracuse would struggle based on the schedule. But man, the decision to play that kid throughout at quarterback, if Ricky Collins was indeed healthy, I think cost Syracuse a win. I just think that that's bad coaching. That's all. Want to throw that out there. Totally non-fantasy related, but want to throw it out there. UConn, Joe Fagnano, the quarterback, turning fortunes around for some guys off the waiver wire. 15 touchdown passes in the last 4 games. 3 of those 300-yard passing performances, and UConn gets the poorest Duke pass defense this week. And look, if you know Duke as well, you know they're going to chunk it around. That's a really good game to have some fantasy assets. Cooper Barkate as well, right? You've got Mensah, you got Fagnano, you've got Skylar Bell, who's just been an absolute gem at wide receiver. But you've got options in that game. North Texas, Drew Mestimaker. Thought we were kind of getting like that fantasy factor after 2 straight games in which he threw 4 touchdown passes. And then last week he goes out and they beat Navy. He leads North Texas to a win over Navy, while Caleb Hawkins scores all 4 touchdowns on the ground. And now if you've got Drew Mestimaker, you've kind of hit the reset button again. Can I really risk putting him in there knowing that they can be so run heavy that I may not get a passing touchdown? And so I think for you guys are right back where you were 3-4 weeks ago with Drew Mestimaker. Baylor. Let's talk about Baylor, because I think Bryson Washington has been getting, he's been getting a lot of, is Bryson Washington dead? Bust, all that stuff. I'm seeing certain things in the Discord, getting some emails. Look, guys, this is one of those things you just cannot foresee, right? Bryson Washington has been dinged up all year, and it's reflecting in his utilization. And right now, you really can't start him. And I don't know if he's going to be a startable option for the rest of the year, because I just don't know how healthy he can be. And in the same conversation, I think we have to go to Buffalo. Remember, these were conversations we were having about Buffalo running back Al-Jay Henderson. We were like, we think we have an offensive line issue at Buffalo. And it wasn't necessarily an Al-Jay Henderson issue. Had never had a 100-yard rushing game all year. And then what happens in week 10 when a lot of rosters have depth that's depleted? There's a number of guys out there that have had to hold on to Al-Jay Henderson because there have been so many bye weeks. And guess what? You get rewarded with a 100-yard game, and you get rewarded with a touchdown in week 10. Let's see if Al-Jay Henderson and that Buffalo offense can at least keep some momentum going on the ground. We know that they can do it in the air with Victor Snow. But let's see if this was a turn of the corner for Al Henderson and that Buffalo running game here during the back half of the season. Now, we have to mention another running back where we're talking about the tale of two different seasons, right? We've had Robert Henry, I mentioned at the top. We have to go to Rutgers, where Antoine Raymond, 9 touchdowns in the first 5 games of the year. He's only scored two in the last 4 games. Could that have been a result of some schedule? Possibly. Let's see. I think this is a bounce back game for Antoine Raymond. He gets Maryland. Rutgers gets Maryland at home this week. I think you get a bounce back game if you've got running back Antoine Raymond. West Virginia. The reason why I bring up West Virginia is this. They play a really bad rush defense this week in Colorado. And you've got Hubbard that's coming off of that 29 carry, 108 yard, 1 touchdown performance in that win over Houston. Another good matchup. I'm smelling back to back 100-yard games for Dior Hubbard. Now, let's go to Miami because now we have to discuss some injuries. CJ Daniels, questionable. We've got Mark Fletcher that's likely out as well. I think Miami's very fortunate right now, even though I've been on the train all year, that I didn't think Miami was as good as the hype that they were getting. Carson Beck is just not a great decision maker when it comes to throws. No surprise to me that SMU was able to beat them at home. I don't think Miami is as good as they were ranked a little while ago. And now they've got injury problems on top. I think they could be very thankful that they get Syracuse this week. Hopefully it's a week for them to kind of get healthy. But let's see what happens to Miami after this week. They're very fortunate they get Syracuse this week. And look, JoJo Trader at the beginning of the year, he was my top Miami receiver. He had a breakout game last week. Now, most of the damage he did was in the first quarter. He did have a big drop. I'm curious to see how Miami plays that wide receiver rotation going into this week without CJ Daniels, but we know that Malachi Toney should continue to be the top option for Carson Beck in that offense. And now, when we talk about top options in the passing game, is there a more lethal duo in college fantasy football right now than Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate? You've got Julian saying 4 touchdown passes in back-to-back games. No reason to think that that's going to slow down anytime soon. Both of those guys, both my guys, I think they're both in top 5 this week for my rankings. Remember, there's so many buys. It's hard not to put Smith and Tate at the top, but I think I have both of them as a top 5 weekly option in week 11. Arizona State. There's a lot of talk about Jordan Tyson. Will he opt out? Will he will he play the rest of the year? And maybe there was some news that came today. I've been prepping for the show, trying to get the projections up, trying to get the rankings up. So I've been a little bit disconnected, things coming in a little bit at a time. But here's my thing. Arizona State just beat Iowa State on the road with Jeff Sims at quarterback. Now, yes, Jeff Sims is a turnover machine, but he also rushed the ball 29 times, had over 200 yards rushing, scored 2 touchdowns. If Arizona State's good enough to beat Iowa State on the road, then I think they're good enough to go ahead, for Jordan Tyson to come back. And look, here's the thing that we don't talk about, right? Like, I don't know, the guy, should he come back? Should he risk his NFL future? I don't know what are in these NIL deals, like, right? I don't know what these guys get paid. Can they really just get paid and say, hey, I opt out for the season and just take that money to the bank? What's the look if that happens? I don't know. These are a lot of things about the NIL with college that I don't think many of us really understand right now. I don't know if it's as clear cut as this guy can just opt out. I don't know what kind of money he's getting paid. Are there any stipulations to his NIL deal on based on the number of games that he plays? All I know is that if Jordan Tyson plays, he's going to get a lot of targets for that Arizona State offense. And for you guys that own him, I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that we get Jordan Tyson back to close out the year for you guys. Now, Louisville had to make a change out today. Isaac Brown, I know he's going to be out for multiple weeks. And really what this does is it just elevates Keon Brown into that running back one spot. I think they may get Duke Watson back this week, but if so, it'll probably be a slow roll with him back in. Kewan Brown's really done enough to establish himself as that next best option in the Louisville offense, at least at running back, and I'm assuming he's going to have a big game this week. Now, we talked about some players emerging over the last couple of weeks. How about Liberty running back Evan Dickens? 6 touchdowns in the last 2 games. They get Missouri State this week. You guys that were able to get Evan Dickens get to ride the momentum wave, 6 touchdowns. You don't go into a bye, you go right into another matchup this week against Missouri State. To me, you've got to start him. Given that most recent performance, 6 touchdowns last 2 weeks, you got to start him. Fresno State. I want to bring this up because Fresno State's 30-7 win over Boise State for me was one of the shockers of last week. And even more of a shocker, there was no ground game for the Boise State Broncos. And now I'm not even sure at this particular point of the season if it's really worth the risk of taking a stab on starting a Boise State running back unless you're just in a super deep league. Right now, I'm staying away if my playoff life is on the line. Now let's go over to Pitt because Desmond Reed, you guys have to make a lot of tough decisions. I know I mentioned in my notes and observations. I'm not sure how you have confidence to put Desmond Reed in at this point unless we see him fully healthy. And then here's another thing that we have to remember. Jacarian Turner's not going anywhere. He's had double-digit rush attempts in 5 of the last 8 weeks. He's fresh off of that 22-carry, 127-yard performance against Stanford. He's got 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's more of an offensive threat on the ground to score than Desmond Reed is. Desmond Reed's strength is actually more dual threat. It's being able to give you the scrimmage yards, not only on the ground, out of the backfield, but also in the air as a receiver right now. Desmond Reed, I just don't know if I have any confidence to start him, even if they announce that he's healthy in the next matchup, unless you really need him because you just don't have a lot of depth on your roster. But I don't think Jacarian Turner is going anywhere, and I don't think they're going to scale back his workload. I still anticipate double-digit carries for Jacarian Turner as long as that Pitt offense is rolling. Now, Indiana's Elijah Surratt, wide receiver. Here's what I saw. Here's what I heard. It seems like his removal from the game last week was precautionary. I get it. Indiana has a lot on the line. I'm expecting him to play this week at Penn State. From a fantasy perspective, though, it's really scary. Will we get to a point that if Indiana is up by a couple of scores over Penn State and he gets tightness in that hamstring again, will they just pull him for precautionary reasons? Indiana's trying to play for the playoffs. They're not trying to play to win someone a college fantasy football title. Elijah Surratt right now has me a little nervous for you guys because I'm not exactly sure, even if he plays, if he's going to give you a 4 full quarters. But if he does, he's a top 10 fantasy option going into the week, right? We just couldn't rank him like that because of the uncertainty. But given that there are 33 teams on a bye this week, Elijah Surratt plays 60 minutes. He's a top 10 fantasy receiver going into the week, and I wouldn't hesitate in starting him. Michigan, Justice Haynes going to be out for a while. That benefits all of you guys with Jordan Marshall. There's even rumors that Haynes could be out as far as the Ohio State game, which at that particular point, we're just looking at the college fantasy football championship. But it looks like you guys that have Jordan Marshall are going to be able to ride him for the next couple of weeks. Then we go to Ole Miss, where they get the Citadel. And then here we come. We're at this point in the season where Ole Miss is a contender. Are they going to play their starters throughout this game, or how far will the starters play? Here's what I would say. I think Trinidad Chambliss, I think Lane Kiffin has a history of racking up some good numbers for his starters in this game. Again, there's a ton of bye weeks. What else are you going to roll out there? I think if you have Trinidad Chambliss, you roll him out. If you have Kewan Lacey, you roll him out there. Hopefully those guys combine for, 4 first half touchdowns. Maybe Lacey gets 2 rushing. Trinidad Chambliss throws 2 touchdowns, maybe adds a third on the ground. They get 35 points at halftime, and those starters are out of the game at 35-0. Austin Simmons comes in, gets some playing time. Logan Diggs comes in at halftime, gets some playing time. But I almost feel with the number of buys, there's a lot of rosters that are going to be decimated by the bye week. I almost feel like many of you guys are going to be forced to play them, and I think that's okay. I think you just try to get those points in the first half, get what you can, squeeze as much juice out of that lemon, and then move on, right? And then Oregon State. Remember when Anthony Hankerson was given that softball against Lafayette a couple of weeks ago? Well, now the Beavers get Sam Houston. And Anthony Hankerson, in my opinion, is a top five back this week. And I think there's a chance he could challenge to be the number one running back by the end of week 11 against that Sam Houston defense. Don't hesitate to start Anthony Hankerson this week against the Bearcats. Florida State. Let's talk about them because I think this is a little similar to what we were talking about Memphis earlier in the show. You've got Samuel Singleton that just emerged last week, became the leading rusher, scored a touchdown, had 100 yards for Florida State. You still had Gavin Sawchuk score a couple of touchdowns in the backfield, but Singleton's utilization, really, in my opinion, it's hands off of this Florida State backfield right now. I don't think you can really just go all in and hope that Singleton's going to give you two rushing touchdowns every week. I almost feel that with Singleton's emergence, Sawchuk now has become a bench, even though he just scored two rushing touchdowns. If he's not going to get the touches, I'm not sure you can really invest in that Florida State backfield. And what makes me a little nervous about Singleton is not that they get Clemson this week, but we've just seen it for 1 week, and I'm always a little hesitant on starting that 1 week wonder player. So that's my take on the Florida State backfield. And then we go to USC, where Makai Lemon, remember, USC has played, they've run a pretty tough gauntlet here. Michigan, Notre Dame, Nebraska. Makai Lemon hasn't exactly been that good over the last 3 weeks, but I think a game against Northwestern is a good bounce back week for for USC receiver Makai Lemon, just like I feel Maryland against Rutgers is a good bounce back week for Antoine Raymond in that Rutgers backfield. So I do expect a bounce back week by Makai Lemon. I know there's a lot of hesitation on maybe starting him, but I do think the matchups are everything sometimes in college fantasy football. And I do think Makai Lemon is a player that you can ride in week 11. And then real quick, I just want to talk about this. San Diego State plays at Hawaii. To me, this is one of the more intriguing matchups of the weekend just because of how hot the Hawaii offense has been with quarterback Micah Alejado and Jackson Harris at receiver. I think he's got 3 or 4 straight 100-yard games. San Diego State sitting atop the Mountain West Conference, and that defense has been really strong for them and probably the number one reason why they're sitting at the top of the standing. So let's see. Let's see what week 11 brings us. But here it is, guys. This is the week now. You've got weeks 11 and week 12 for most of you guys. 2 weeks left to make a move. Every roster decision counts. Sometimes you got to err on the side of caution. Remember, you're better off starting a player with the lower ceiling than you are running the risk of getting that goose egg, particularly if you're coming from a spot of strength. If you're already in the playoffs or you're a top seed, I kind of lean on the side of the higher floor, right? If you're a guy that's playing to get through, you've got to be the top seed, then you could make a little bit more of those riskier, high risk, high reward roster decisions. Where you're at determines everything. It determines your security and selection of players, and it determines how risky you can be in your weekly lineup. But here we go. And look, here's the thing. I think so far we're pretty fortunate. We haven't had a ton of bad weather weeks. We've had weather affect some games, but we're getting close to that time now. Week 11, 12, 13, 14. Pretty soon, we're going to start talking about where weather's going to be a factor all across the country. But until then, let's get week 11 under our belt. 33 teams on a bye. Again, I cannot believe this. Back-to-back weeks with 30-plus buys. Let's see where this goes. Good luck to everyone in the 4-1 Super Fantasy League. Good luck to everyone playing for a top seed or a spot in their college fantasy football playoffs. That's going to do it for the week 11 show. I'm going to see you guys in week 12. Good luck.